Hi, everybody. I'm Dr. Duke. Welcome to The Takeaway. I am back together again with our good friend Alex Newman. Alex, it seems like we're a broken record here. The latest outrage in California about little kids and gender. Talk about this survey from UCLA.
Well, thanks very much, Duke. Basically, the UCLA, it was, I guess, a partnership between some think tank at their School of Law and some public health institute over at UCLA. They did a study where they asked about 1,600 kids about their gender stuff on some sort of survey. And what they came up with was that more than 1/4 of these kids are gender non-conforming. And that can mean that either they look like boys when they're really girls, they dress like boys when they're really girls, or vice versa, or they might be androgynous, where they don't identify as either masculine or feminine. They're kind of asexual, something in between. And so they found that more than 1/4 of California kids between 12 and 17 fall into this non-conforming category. And then from that, they conclude that we need more brainwashing, more propaganda from the government to further normalize and further the acceptance of this gender confusion and this gender ideology that California has taken the lead in pushing.
This is really unbelievable. It is absolutely true. You think about the assault these kids have been under in California schools with textbooks, with surveys, testing, all kinds of psychosocial education in the classroom. From the time these kids enter kindergarten to the time they're in high school, they've been bombarded again with the fluidity of gender, with the idea, hit with surveys that try to fuzzy up their gender. I'm pretty sure if you spent this much time, if liberals spent this much time trying to convince kids that they might be vampires, 1/4 or more of kids would assume they're vampires. If you try to convince these kids using the exact same methods that the California schools are now, that they're all chipmunks, guarantee you that 1/4 or more would identify as chipmunks. And here's what I think would be really fascinating, Alex. What if we did the same thing with race? How many of you think you're a different race than the race you were born? And to give you an example, what we do is we start from the premise that the white race is responsible for the evils of the world, that being white brings privilege and hostility and a legacy of rape and hate. You teach kids that, then you ask them what races they identify with. I'm guaranteeing you that way more than 1/4 of those kids, white kids, identify as something other than white. What we're doing here, and you and I have talked about some of these surveys before, Alex. What we're doing here is we're giving these kids surveys and we're teaching them information to suggest that somehow being heterosexual or somehow being a boy in a boy's body or a girl in a girl's body, that is somehow exclusionary, that is somehow narrow-minded. And so these kids are not reacting to their orientations. They're reacting to the cues they're getting from their textbooks, from their teachers, from the surveys, from the interviews they're conducting.
That's exactly right, Duke. And, California is taking the lead here in the United States, but Sweden is even one step in front of California. They have some data over there, and it turns out that the number of quote-unquote transgender children is doubling every year at this point in Sweden. And I actually witnessed some of this firsthand. The government produces propaganda TV shows for little children promoting gender confusion and transgenderism as something that's like heroic and cool, and they put the manipulative little music and tracks and all the adults praising this poor girl who pretended to be a boy, and they push it in the schools. UNESCO was actually praising Sweden for pushing this gender diversity and sexual diversity in its school textbooks. And so you have a doubling of the so-called transgender population each year. And we're going to continue to see this as this propaganda and as this so-called education continues. And just 2 seconds worth of rational thought would reveal how ridiculous this all is. I mean, just, as a thought experiment, imagine that somebody walks in and, they're skinny as a rail, there's skin and bones, and they say, oh, I'm obese, I need, liposuction, I'm just so fat. And you, A, agree that they're fat and need liposuction, or B, say, oh, well, you have a problem with your perception, you're not actually fat, you're really skinny. And so we're dealing with the same thing here. If a boy walks in and claims to be a girl, this isn't a matter of opinion. This isn't something that we should coddle. We know for a fact that the overwhelming majority of these kids who are confused about their gender will turn out perfectly normal if they're left alone. We know that in some cases there are some sort of problem, psychologically or in the family dynamics that cause the kids to turn to this. I read of a really interesting example. A little 3-year-old boy, suddenly a girl had been born, a sister had been born into his family, and the parents paid a lot of attention to the sister. And so the boy inaccurately assumed that the way to get more attention from the parents was to be a girl, so he started pretending to be a girl. He went to go talk to a therapist. That was cured, and so the problem went away. So rather than pretending like this is some sort of new legitimate discovery that, oh, we can actually be any gender we want regardless of what the chromosomes in every single cell of our body declare, we need to address this and say, no, gender is not a social construct. No, you don't get to pick your gender. You were created either a man or a woman. Live with it, tough. And we need to stop promoting this, of course, in the government schools and in the textbooks and in the media and all the rest of it.
Well, I want to come back to this argument because look at the kinds of information they're putting in these kids' hands. The textbooks are being compelled to teach history through the lens of homosexuality, transgenderism. So you're going back, we discussed earlier, and you're outing people. You're pretending that people from 100, 500 years ago were gay or transgender because they didn't marry, that kind of stuff. But look at the language they're using. Gender nonconforming. You tell young kids that if they're boys in boys' body, they are being conformist. You explain to them that they're being compelled to think a certain way because of stereotypes, well, then they're going to rebel against that. I love this. One of the researchers from UCLA, a woman by the name of Bianca Wilson, one of the people who conducted this survey, she said the following, quote, "The data show that more than 1 in 4 California youth express their gender in ways that go against the dominant stereotype." So you tell a bunch of kids that they're part of a dominant oppressive culture and that they're participating in stereotypes that have no basis in reality. That would be male and female. Of course you're going to get, I'm surprised it's not 50% of kids, given the kind of weird way they've recharacterized all of this and without any real serious long-term psychological study about the consequences of this kids moving down, of the consequences of this for kids moving down the road.
Oh, you give it one more generation and you'll see 50, 75, 80% of the kids, maybe more. Because, you have to remember, these are kids who are 12 to 17. So they were spared the worst of, what we're seeing now in terms of this gender ideology being pushed on the little kids. Homosexual marriage was not a thing when these little kids were, growing up and in kindergarten and elementary school. So this is a new development. It's going to continue. It's very troubling. And, there are psychological implications to this. Of course, the UCLA totally misunderstands their own findings. They say, the kids who are gender nonconformists are twice as likely to have suffered extreme psychological distress in the last year. And then they say, well, the solution to that is we need more government promotion and normalization of gender confusion and, gender whatever weirdness they're doing. And rather than saying, oh, okay, so, the kids who have these confusions about their gender are twice as likely to have psychological problems. Maybe we should stop confusing them about their gender, right? I mean, you would think that would be pretty obvious, but not to these doctorates and of education and law and all kinds of other silly things. So,
I think my metaphor, my analogy about whiteness, think about the way that whiteness is being prepared and focused on in schools, younger. Little kids at very young ages now are being exposed to the idea that to be white is to be privileged. To be privileged is to be part of a dominant culture, to oppress everybody else. We teach history through the lens that white people are primarily responsible for the world's evil. Over and over again, you think about this with regards to these gender surveys. As I said before, I am 100% convinced that if you did these same kind of these gender outreach surveys about race, and frame them the same way you're framing them, most of these kids would identify as anything other than white because they would be bullied into doing so because of what propaganda they've been given. And you know who agrees with us, Alex, is the president of the American Pediatric Association, a woman by the name of Dr. Michelle Cretella, who made this quote directly from your article talking about this. She said, quote, "To indoctrinate all children from preschool forward with the lie that they could be trapped in the wrong body disrupts the very foundation of a child's reality testing." In other words, you're telling these kids that something as basic as their identities in their bodies is something that is going to no longer be stable. And you can't count on it, and you may wake up tomorrow or a week from now or a year from now and be somebody utterly other than you are. Talk about undermining the very core principles on which kids begin to identify with themselves and with others.
Yeah, and the American College of Pediatricians has been really good in calling this out. They call it institutionalized child abuse. This idea that you're going to lie to little children and tell them that they can choose their own gender, that if they just mutilate their genitals, suddenly they're going to be the opposite sex. I mean, it's absolutely ludicrous, and they're right to call it out. It's like the little boy who calls out the emperor for not wearing any clothes. Hey, he's naked. Well, hey, these people are naked. What they're doing is abusive. It's incredibly destructive to these poor children. Most of them, again, if they're left unmolested, would end up totally normal. And yet these fanatics are determined to destroy these lives, destroy these families in pursuit of their harmful ideology. So, I want to give, big shout out, a round of applause to this organization of pediatricians calling them out. They're absolutely right to do that. And, as a society, we need to realize that this is dangerous fanaticism, and it's even more dangerous than just confusing these poor kids. You hear the story of little 8-year-old girls come home crying, "Mommy, I might wake up tomorrow and be a boy." Of course you're not going to wake up tomorrow and be a boy, but that's what they're telling these poor kids in the schools. This is incredibly destructive, incredibly harmful. I agree with the American College of Pediatricians. This is institutionalized child abuse. It needs to be stopped. Unfortunately, though, it's going to continue to be perpetrated with our tax dollars as long and until the American people say enough.
Well, given the way California is going, Alex, in about 5 more years, little girls aren't going to be coming home and crying, "I may wake up a boy someday." Little girls are going to be coming home and crying, "Oh my God, how come I wasn't born a boy? How come I am so confused?" This thing breeds its own kind of repetitiveness. The more this goes on, the more these confused kids, are going to identify which is seen as the victim status. They're going to identify as anything other than they are, to demonstrate to their interviewers, their teachers, the people who oversee these surveys in the classroom, that they're not repressive, they're not conformist, right? They are not all these other things. They are not stereotypes. The best way to do that is to get more of it, is to keep preaching things the way they're going. And with California, we know what's coming down the road. Alex, I appreciate you staying on these stories from us. One after another, they seem to get progressively worse, probably because it's progressives in charge. If you enjoyed that video, please consider following us online, and also consider a tax-deductible donation so we can continue to produce quality videos like the one you just watched. I'm Dr. Duke. Thanks for watching.